Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, home of Mastering MuseScore. Welcome to the MuseScore Café. This is my weekly series that we do where we talk about some aspect of creating music using MuseScore, some aspect of the program itself, how to work the software, how to get different kinds of music into it. And this week is going to be our regular feature, the Score of the Month feature, in which I just take a piece of existing music and go about entering it into MuseScore and see what comes up. So we'll always be looking at node input, the basics of node input for that, so it's good for beginners, but we'll also see whatever kind of weird quirks come up in any particular piece of music and how to handle those sorts of things. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And I'm going to be tying it, as I often am here, I'm going to be tying it into what we're doing in the counterpoint course. We've been looking at a Bach three-part invention. Someone tell me, in your opinion, because I've heard it both ways, I keep hedging on sinfonia or sinfonia, because I have heard it both ways. Sinfonia or sinfonia? Which do you say for the three-part inventions? Um, it's kind of a sort of a made-up word, really. So I don't know that there's a correct about it. But in any case, that's what we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to flip over to the piece that we're going to be entering. And first, I'm just going to let MuseScore.com play it from this version that I have here. So Colleen's saying Sinfonia, which that's how I always used to say it until I heard someone pronounce it Sinfonia, who I thought maybe should know such things. So what I'm going to do, there we go. I'm going to get it that size, and then we're just going to let MuseScore play through a little bit of this thing so we can hear it. So that is the beginning of the piece, and we're just going to enter this music here into MuseScore. In the process, I want to talk about a couple of things specifically. So this version here is one created that was entered into MuseScore by a user, and I don't know his actual name, but MuseScore, and I find that he does really good work. When I find a piece transcribed by him, I'm like, yeah, this is probably pretty good, but I just don't always know, what's going on. So I'm not going to start from this version. I'm instead going to start from a published version, and it's going to be, let me find the right one. It's going to be this guy here. So I'm going to post, nope, that's not it. There we go. Nope, that ain't it either. Give me a moment. It's going to be this version here, I think, that we're going to be entering. And the reason I talk about this is there's differences between these versions, and I want to get a version that I feel good about. So whenever I'm doing this sort of thing, I do like to talk about how I'm making that determination. So this particular piece, when I look for just that piece, I find a few versions of it here. But also, if I look for the collection of all 15 of them, I find a few versions of that. And what I'm looking for is, I don't know, I'm looking for something that feels first of all, nicely readable, but also what I don't want is a lot of extra stuff that clearly was added by an editor. So here's one that's just not, I like this version a lot, but it's just hard to read because it's a little blurry, right? And so this version is nice and clear. This version here um, is kind of interesting. It's, I think, trying to be faithful to Bach's original version, which he uses soprano clef instead of treble clef. And so they're just showing you a picture of that soprano clef up front, just to let you know, Bach wrote this thing in soprano clef, but we're going to make it readable for you. So that's something that is a fact of that version. So those are always things that you get to kind of think about, well, which version of this am I going to go with? But these are all from IMSLP. So that said, I do have that version up here in a version that I can have pinned while I work. And so people always ask about this, and so I want to show you that this is a feature of, of my Chromebook that lets me float, it's called, a window, so that it stays visible even while I work. It's a great feature, and it's a great feature that lets you keep seeing this window even while you're working in another window. If you're on Windows, there is a power tools, what was it called? Someone remind me what that thing is called. On Mac OS, there's a very specific command that will float windows, but man, is it a useful feature. So I definitely, if you're doing this sort of thing much, I definitely recommend you figure it out. Of course, you could also print it out, have it on a piece of paper, or have another device open, like if you have a tablet sitting next to it and showing it on the tablet. But for the purpose of these demonstrations, I love being able to have it on screen so I can share it. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Power toys. That's what I thought. Okay, so let's go ahead now and start to actually create this score. So I've set it up. I haven't set it up yet, but I have the window here where I set things up, and I can either choose instruments or create from template. And depending on what I'm doing, I will sometimes choose the individual instruments. Sometimes I will start from a template, hoping that it sets some things up for me. Here, I'm going to pick the grand staff template. It does the exact same thing, as far as I know, as choosing piano as an instrument. I don't think there's anything different or new about it. So then I hit next, and in here, I can type in the title, and I'm going to type Sinfonia, since everyone seems to be in agreement that that's what it is. And then this is J.S. Bach, and this is BWV 794, no lyricist, and it's out of copyright. I'm done. So the thing is that the split screen is nice, but it doesn't do the same thing as what I'm doing here. Because notice this window stays visible. Even when I'm working in the window behind it, this window stays visible. Now, if your screen is large enough that you can split the screen and have the windows side by side, great. But you know, my screen, I'm working on a laptop here, and my screen's not really big enough to do that conveniently, although I do it sometimes. So anyhow, that process of sort of setting up your windows, that's going to depend on your operating system, how big your monitor is. But you're absolutely right that either setting up your MuseScore window and your PDF viewer either side by side or top to bottom is certainly a possibility. All right. So I've got this thing basically set up now, and I forgot to put in the key, and I forgot to choose the time signature because I'm always in a rush when I do these things and I always forget. So let's add a key. I'm going to select the first measure, go to key signatures, and say it's B flat. The time signature 4/4 is the same as common time, and Bach typically wrote the C. So even though it doesn't matter, I'm just going to go ahead and change it to the C. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is something I don't always do, but when I'm looking at the score here, it's pretty consistently 2 measures per system, right? The very end, he fits 3. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the whole score with Control A. Nice that you were able to quit MuseScore that way. And yeah, that should work. So I'm going to select the whole score, then I'm going to go to Format, add, remove system breaks, and say that I want them every 2 measures. And the reason I'm doing this is just so that as I'm entering music, it kind of matches what I see. Most music that I'm entering isn't going to have exactly 2 measures per system, right? It's going to have 2 on some, 3 on some, 7 on others, right? Depends on how full the music is. But Bach music with all these 16th notes, this piece is going to pretty commonly have 2 measures per system because that's what's going to fit. And this way it enables what I'm doing to kind of match what I'm seeing. The other thing that I want to do here is I want to zoom this score in to completely fill the window. And there is a setting for that here. If I come down to the lower right and pick page width, it now zooms to completely fill the width of my window. And I know that this isn't as big as it could be because I'm showing the chat also, so I don't not see what people are commenting. So actually, I'm going to just expand this a little bit because I don't really need to see pictures, even though it's nice. And notice that as I'm making my window wider, the score is getting bigger too. When you pick that setting that says page width, it automatically adjusts, which is kind of nice. All right, so the reason I chose this piece, well, A, we're working on it, but it has a particular thing going on that I want to talk about, and that is how it uses multiple voices. The sinfonias have 3 voices, and so if I actually play this, well, I don't need to play it on the piano. If I let, well, I can't play this thing, so I'll have to play it here. And now, right now we have our 3rd voice. So there's 3 voices total in this piece. And the thing is, the bottom voice is always on the bottom staff. The top voice is always on the top staff. The middle voice is mostly on the top staff, but we're going to see eventually it wanders. Where does it wander? Right here. It wanders down to the bottom staff. And I want to show how to do that. So we're going to enter a measure or 2, and then I'm going to skip to this measure so we can talk about this idea of the fact that logically, the thing that is the bottom voice of the top staff is logically the same thing as this thing that's the top voice of the bottom staff a little further into the measure. And I want to talk about the ways we're going to deal with that and why they might matter. All right, so notice in the first measure here, there is a rest floating above the top of the staff. That is because the top voice is resting for that first measure. Now, this is a typical thing that we'll see in contrapuntal music like this, where if a voice isn't used, we show its rest. It's not like if this had been not this kind of piece, if it had just been some ordinary non-contrapuntal kind of piece that just happened to use multiple voices occasionally, you wouldn't need to show a rest to say, hey, that voice isn't doing anything for this measure. But you'll see that in this kind of music that is consistently being 3 voices throughout, that it will do that. It will show the empty voice. So that beginning part here is actually in voice 2. So I'm going to go ahead and enter it that way. So I will select that measure, and actually I'll just go ahead and zoom in. I'm using Control 2-finger swipe to do my zooming. I'll press N for note input mode, and let me see if I can. Every once in a while, for some reason, the thing that I have that shows my keystroke works and then stops working, and I still have not figured it out. But nope, still not working. All right, so I'm in note input mode, and now I'm going to switch to voice 2, and I'll go ahead and use the voice 2 button on the toolbar to do that. Now that I have voice 2, because voice 1 is empty, I'm not going to enter anything into voice 1. Voice 2 is where I want to enter these notes. So it's an 8th note, an 8th rest first. So 4 is the shortcut. 4, 5, 6, 8th, quarter, half, right? 4 for 8th, and then 0 for my rest. And now 3 for 16ths, C, A, and then 4 for eighth, D, C, B flat, and then 3 for sixteenths, A, G, C, D, B flat, C, A, B flat, 4, C, and now I want to tie to a half note. So I'll select the half note duration with 6 and then press T. T will enter the note and tie it all in one operation. Next, I need the quarter note B natural. So 5 for quarter note, equals is the shortcut for natural. Minus for flat, plus for sharp, equals for natural. So yes, you can enter the note first, then use the arrow keys to adjust, but knowing the shortcuts is nice too for the individual accidentals because we'll need them when we do courtesy accidentals. So now I've entered my 5, my natural, and all I got to do is type my B, and I got my B. So far so good, right? I'm now going to, I think, leave note input mode by pressing escape. And notice that that rest has now centered above the staff just like it should be. I'm going to go ahead and enter that bottom voice next. So I'll select that bottom voice, that bottom staff, press N for note input mode, and here I'm going to use voice 1 because it's the only voice here. But remember that in a minute. I'm going to type my low F, so F, which isn't low enough, so control down or command down on Mac, and then 6, F, control up, 5, E, 4, F, 3, A, G, 4, F, E, D, 3, G, F, 4, G, G. So I wanted the low G. I didn't get the low G, so control down gives me the low G. This thing that I'm doing of singing the notes while I enter them, I mean, it feels like an affectation, but it's actually kind of useful to me because it helps me make sure that I'm understanding the music that I'm putting in and that I'm putting the right notes in and getting the right octaves and so forth. So I now have all the notes for that first line here. But all the notes isn't the same as all the music, right? I mean, we see that there's ornaments and things. So I'm going to want to get those ornaments in here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to come back to the MuseScore window. I'm going to get out of note input mode by pressing escape. And we're going to put in this guy here. So this guy here, and every time I do one of these pieces, I always have to second guess myself, mordant, inverted mordant, and short trill, and all the distinctions. I'm going to make it look like that, and I'm not going to worry about whether MuseScore's playback does what Bach intended by it. So I'm going to come over to MuseScore here, and I'm going to look for the ornaments palette, and I'm going to be disappointed because I don't have it. I've reset my palettes here. Oh, I do have it. I thought let me get rid of it for a moment. Let me get rid of it. I started to, okay, there we go. By default, these are the palettes that you're going to have, starting with clefs. And you're not going to see ornaments on the list. So we're going to go to Add Palettes, and you'll see a list of all the palettes that MuseScore provides that aren't there by default. Now, if I'm going to use a symbol just once, and I know I don't need that palette for real, I might skip this. I might go to View, Master Palette, and this will let me get at the ornaments, get that thing, and get out without having to add another palette. But I know I'm going to need a bunch of those guys. So what I'm going to do is go back to where it says Add Palettes and click that plus button by Ornaments. And now the Ornaments palette is added. And notice it gets added at the top of the list. Well, that's not really what I want. I want to put it right after Articulations because that's where I'm used to seeing it. I think that's where MuseScore 3 had it. Also, here's another trick. For ordering these palettes, some people like them alphabetic, which doesn't make sense to me because like clefs and time signatures belong together, but they're nowhere near each other alphabetically, right? A lot of things are kind of like that. So the default ordering is meant to be a little more logical, but when you add palettes, they just show up at the top, which isn't logical at all. If you go to View, Master Palette, you can kind of look at the order because these are all the palettes here, and you can see that ornaments are, yeah, this doesn't match. Clefs, key signatures, time signatures, brackets is next, then accidentals. Yeah, so this order doesn't match this order, which is kind of interesting. Um, so anyhow, I like my ornaments next to articulations because somehow they seem related to me, even though maybe they're not. All right, so I'm going to select this. Now that I've got that ornaments palette there, I'll select that B flat and then come over to the articulation, nope, not articulations, ornaments palette, and I'm going to enter that guy. And it says short trill. And notice it is displaying below the note. Well, that is the default when using multiple voices. The default is to put articulations and ornaments outside. Because if that, let me press X to flip it above. If I flip it above with X, now it's not clear which voice it applies to. It's a little unfortunate that it went over that rest, but even if I drag it down here, which I never do, does that ornament apply to that B flat or does it apply to what's above it? Here, what's above it happens to be a rest, so you can kind of get away with it, but that's why we don't put stuff we don't generally put markings between the two voices. So I'm going to press Control R to reset that to the default position of below. All right. I said I had finished entering the music, but of course I haven't. I haven't entered voice 1 in that second measure, top staff. So let's do that. I'm going to select that measure. And I could get fancy here. I don't think I'm going to, but I could have gotten fancy and said, hey, this, because I know this is imitative counterpoint, that this line that is going to be in voice 1 here is actually the same line as what was in the previous measure, just transposed. And I could copy and paste it and transpose it and then fix the things that are a little different. Like notice the first line starts with ba-dum, with a third, and then the imitation starts ba-dum, with a step. We're going to learn more about that in the counterpoint course, this idea of tonal versus real imitation, what that's about, and why sometimes those adjustments are made. But in any case, because because of the different voices and because of the adjustments there, it's going to be more work than it's worth to try to copy and paste that. I'm just going to enter the passage myself. So I will select that measure, press N for node input mode. I'm just checking my other screen, make sure that I'm still live. And now I'm going to enter my voice 1 here. So every time you go to node input mode, it resets to voice 1. So when I left node input mode, remember when I first entered that top staff, I used the voice 2 button. I don't need to press the voice 1 button because I've just entered node input mode. It defaults to voice 1. And you can see that on the toolbar. So 4 for eighth, and then 0 for the rest, and then 3. Oh, by the way, notice when I did that, oh, never mind. I was going to say the stem directions flip, but they were flipped automatically anyhow because of the rest that got entered there. So never mind. But that is the case. When you first enter notes into voice 1, they will have their default stem directions. But as soon as you enter notes into voice 2, the stem directions fix themselves. All right. So 4, 0 for the rest, 3, and now F, and not that F, but Control up F, E, 4, A, G, F. Now, here, well, I'm going to keep entering the notes. I know I need that short trill there, but 3, E, D, G, A, F, G, and just stop there. So I'll leave node input mode by pressing escape. So I now want to enter that short trill. As far as I know, I haven't entered anything else from the palette since I entered the other trill. MuseScore has a very useful command that's sort of not a well-known command, and there's not a default shortcut for it. So I want to show you how to get to it. If you go to Edit, Preferences, Shortcuts, and then in the search box here, type the word apply. You'll see there's a command called apply current palette element. If you then click the define button, you can define your own shortcut for it. And you'll see that I have it customized to be backslash. That backslash command now is available. So you can type in your own shortcut and press OK, and then it'll remember it. That will basically do the same thing that whatever that last palette element you used was. So the last thing I did was apply that trill. So if I now press backslash, boom, I get that trill again. So if I've got a whole bunch of trills to add, and I know I'm going to because this piece it's got that kind of stuff, right? Here's one coming in the next bar. I think probably he stops using them at some point and assumes that the reader is going to fill them in themselves. But in any case, it's a great command to know about. Apply current palette element. So now I can just select another note and press backslash, and it gives me the trill. Now I'm going to undo that with Control Z. So yeah, that apply current palette element is a super useful command. We added it somewhere around MuseScore 3.5, 4, or 5, somewhere around there, and then it got lost at first in the transition to MuseScore 4, but it came back 4.21 or 2 or something. So it is now back, but it's never had a default shortcut. But backslash is what I've always used. If we're ever going to add one, that's what I would recommend. So now that I've entered that first bit of music there, I want to return to looking at some of the other versions of this just to see what differences we might notice. So if I return to this version that first of all uses the term Fantasia and also shows that little picture of a clef here. Do I see anything different? Well, no, I see the trill below. The rest is floating on the staff or sitting on the staff instead of floating above, but that's like just, engraving differences. Your different editors will choose to place their rest differently, and unless there's a specific reason why you need to honor the way some particular editor did it, like this editor here floats his rest above. This guy here puts his rest on the top line. So either are valid. But what I was looking for is, well, gee, are there any dynamic markings? Oh, look also at the first rest here. This editor chose to displace that very first eighth rest to clarify that it's voice 2. This editor here chose not to. What did MuseScore do? MuseScore chose to displace it a little bit. I tend to not second guess those decisions unless they just create like outright collisions that I can't live with, right? If I see something colliding by default or just totally unreadable or confusing, then I will fix it. But mostly I just go with the defaults and assume that future versions might improve the defaults. Kevin's asking if current element is always last element. Yes, that is what it means. This model, you should know, comes from when the palettes were made keyboard navigable, because they weren't navigable by keyboard until like 3.3, I think. It wasn't possible to navigate the palettes by keyboard, and that was an important accessibility feature made around MuseScore 3.3. And so there's a notion of which is the current element, and it's the one that's highlighted. You can see that even when my cursor isn't on it, it's blue. I'm trying to point to it on my screen, but it's highlighted in blue. Even if I open other palettes, I have it set to close. That, by the way, is an option. I like that option because it keeps my view kind of uncluttered here. So if I click the ... by palettes, you'll see I have the open only one palette at a time option selected. And that means when I open a palette, it closes whatever else was open. I like that. Some people don't. But in any case, yeah, so the keyboard navigation has this notion of what is the current one, and it's what would be entered when you press enter, and then that is remembered, and that is what the current palette element will do. So it's a convenient way if you've got a whole bunch of the same symbol to enter, but you can't just enter it on a range. It's not like all the notes in this range, but it's this note, this note, and that note. Then you select a note, hit the backslash, select a note, hit the backslash, select a note, hit the backslash, etc. And you can also do that, I think, while entering notes. I'm going to test that theory right now because I don't remember. If I type an E, if I press backslash, is it going to add the trill or not? Yep, it does. So even in note input mode, you can use backslash to apply that element, which is kind of nice because it means now that's why I stopped myself when I got to that F and thought, gee, if I have the last palette element shortcut defined, I can probably enter that trill while I'm entering the note. So now I know that for next time because I couldn't remember if that worked in note input mode or not. All right, there's one other thing I want to do here before I flip ahead is I do want to come back to the version on MuseScore.com and point out that notice all the stuff that he's got going on. He's got dynamics, he's got slurs, he's got articulations, those staccato dots. He's got a hairpin here. These are all editorial things. Now, do I think that that guy Marc Sabatella added those himself? No, I suspect not. I suspect this is coming from he started with some later edition where the editor added these things. And I know, yeah, different editors will add things. Carl Czerny is sort of, I think, from what I understand, Bach people have kind of a love-hate relationship with him because he's done so much did so much to make Bach's music more widely available, but also made some editorial decisions that people argue with. I don't have a horse in that race personally, but I wonder if some of these came from a Carl Czerny edition. Anyhow, that's just something I wonder about. In fact, if I look, oh yeah, there's that version. Yeah, the Czerny version isn't available as an individual thing, but if I look up the full book of all the sinfonias, you'll see a Czerny edition, and then you can see if it's got any of those other articulations. So anyhow, I just wanted to point out that I'm not going to enter those other articulations because they're clearly not something that was in these older editions. Most of the older editions are fairly light with things like dynamics and stuff. They will often have the ornaments because they were fairly significant in Baroque music, but also it's not uncommon to see editions that really have very few ornaments, and it doesn't mean it's not expected to play with them. It's meant that the player was expected to add his own. Those were among the things that at different points in history and in different types of music, players were expected to do their own ornamentation, figure out when they wanted to add trills and so forth. All right, so I've got those first couple measures in here, and I mentioned I want to skip to the place where the voices start to change staves, and that is over here in measure 14. All right, so I'm going to skip down in my score to measure 14, right here. And I'm going to start entering that passage and then talk about what I'm going to do, all right? Because this is an important consideration. There's multiple ways of doing this, and I'll tell you why I like the way I like. There's a couple good reasons for it. So I'm going to go to note input mode here and enter that top line there. 4 for the 8th, G, control down. 3 for the 16th, F, E, A, B flat, G, A, 6 for the F, and it's tied to something, it's tied to a 16th, so 3T. All right, instead of leaving note input mode, I'm going to use Control Left. Control Left moves the cursor back, kind of a measure at a time, so it moves me back to the beginning of the measure. Command Left on Mac. Anytime I say Control, it's generally Command on Mac. Which, by the way, is freaking me out. I have an iPad that I got pretty recently, and So I already knew that to use command instead of control for a lot of things. Obviously, I'm not running MuseScore on it, but just ordinary editing kinds of things. But I've discovered that some things that I expect to be command whatever because it's control that on Windows aren't, and it's kind of annoying. But in any case, that's what it is. All right, I'm going to go ahead and enter start and well, I'm going to all right, no, I can't enter anything until we talk through this. So there are three voices now, right? G, D, and E. Those are the notes that we are dealing with in these three voices. And the question is, well, logically, contrapuntally, those are three voices, 1, 2, and 3. But we need to decide from a purely logistic MuseScore standpoint, which voices we want to use to represent those three voices. In other words, I'm not going to call this bottom part voice 3 just because logically it's the third voice of the Sinfonia. I've been entering those notes into voice 1 because each staff in MuseScore starts with voice 1. So the question here is, now that I know that top line was going to be voice 1. That wasn't up for debate. But the question is, what about this bottom line here? Do I start entering this bottom line into voice 1, because there's only one voice at the beginning here, and then change to voice 2 midway through the measure and have the middle line here be voice 1? Or, that's one option. So option number 1 is start entering these notes into voice 1, and then switch to voice 2 mid-measure. So this middle part can be voice 1. So option number 1 again is enter voice 1 at first and then switch to voice 2 for that bass line. That's option 1. Option number 2 is, since I'm eventually going to need two voices in this measure, let me just go ahead and enter that entire bass line into voice 2. And that way, when that line comes in mid-measure, it can be voice 1. That's option 2. Option 3 is going to be, well, since I've been entering that bass line in voice 1, I want to keep entering that bass line in voice 1. It's been good enough for 13 measures. Why can't I keep using voice 1? And then when I get to this new middle voice here, enter it into the top staff, and then use cross-staff notation to move the notes down. If that's something you've never done before or never seen before, that's going to be an eye-opener here. So those are my three options. Either start entering that bass line into voice 1 and then switch to voice 2, or enter that bass line into voice 2 the whole way, or enter that bass line into voice 1 the whole way and use cross-staff notation. Depending on what else is going on, any of those might be the right answer. So I'm going to put that to you here in the chat. If you're following this, which do you think I'm going to pick and why? I'll tell you in a minute. But I want to hear some comments here of which you think is the best answer, and then I'll tell you why I'm going to pick what I'm going to pick. So let me go through those options and talk about why I'm not going to choose them. That first option of changing the voice of that bass line mid-measure, I'm not going to do that because I don't like it. I don't like taking something that was logically one line and changing it mid-measure. I will do it if it's the only way to get the job done, but somehow I like to keep each measure kind of logically intact, and since that's one voice, logically speaking, I like to keep it in the same voice. So even though it would totally work to enter this guy into voice 1 for the first 2 beats, and then enter it into voice 2 for the second 2 beats, I'm not going to choose it just because it rubs me the wrong way. All right? And then, so people are coming in basically suggesting the cross-staff option, which is option number 3. And yes, That is what we're going to do. So I've already said I'm not going to pick my option one, changing voice midstream. I'm not going to pick that because I like each measure to be consistent. I'm not going to pick option two for this piece because, yes, I could enter that whole bass line into voice two and then the middle voice into voice one. I could totally do that. And if this wasn't a contrapuntal piece that literally has three voices the whole way through, I would totally do that. If this was a Schumann piece or Beethoven or whatever, and just happened to need multiple voices for a couple of beats, I will treat each measure as a unit and do what I need to do for that measure. And it won't matter so much if if things are a little inconsistent measure to measure. I'm going to keep it simple. That's for most music. But for music that's inherently contrapuntal like this, okay, Stephen, I'm going to look at bar 19 next because, yeah, I'll be able to get to that. So because this piece is in three voices consistently until maybe the very last measure, the very last measure, I'm going to expect that maybe he introduces a fourth voice. Does he? No, he doesn't, but sometimes he does. In a lot of his three voice pieces, he'll introduce a fourth voice for the very last two measures or something. So because it's the same three voices consistently, I really like it to be the same thing throughout the piece. So if this middle voice here started off as top staff voice two, I want it to be top staff voice two throughout the piece. That way, I can just cursor through it. And if I'm on voice two, I can go through it one note at a time. I like that for ease of note input, but it's also an important accessibility consideration. It's going to make it easier for a blind user following what's going on in the piece to do this if that middle voice doesn't suddenly change from one measure to the next. Oh, that logical middle voice started off as top staff voice two, and now it's bottom staff voice one. That doesn't, that you want to just be able to use the cursor keys and listen to the screen reader output and have it continue. So for accessibility reasons, I find that really useful. It's also going to export to Braille better because Braille isn't going to need to have this notion that, oh, it changed clefs just because the notes got low. In Braille music, that wouldn't be a consideration. So yeah, cross staff notation is the winner. So we're going to do it. So I'll go ahead and enter this passage into voice two. I'll click the voice two icon, then 5 for quarter note, enter my D, not that active, so control down, and now C sharp, so plus C. And now I'm going to start entering the rest of that line and then use cross staff notation to shift it down. And I think, how long does that passage last? It lasts kind of a while, right? So I'm going to start doing it one note at a time, but then I'll show you maybe another option here. So what I'm going to do is get back to that measure, and then 3 for 16th, 0 for rest, and there it is on the top staff, but I want it on the bottom. Control Shift down. Did I get that right? Yes, Control Shift down moves it to the bottom staff. And now I can start entering the rest of the notes. D, Control Shift down. Now I mentioned that we need, you can use the arrow keys. Oh yeah, that's not a courtesy accidental. That's a real accidental. But in any case, equals is the shortcut for the C, for the natural sign. So I enter my C, Control Shift down, A, Control Shift down, B flat, Control Shift down. You can see I'm going to get tired of this Control Shift down if it goes on for a long time, right? And then plus C, Control Shift down, D, Control Shift down, A, Control Shift down, blah, 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 blah. So I got that now. Let's go ahead and leave note input. Actually, no, I'm going to hit Control left to move to the back to the beginning of the measure. And now I'm going to use the shortcut to move to the staff below. Normally that shortcut is Alt down. Alt down is the shortcut to move to the staff below. You may have heard me mention that on my keyboard, Alt down is predefined to do a page down command. I can't override it easily. So I've redefined that shortcut in MuseScore, so that left bracket is next. Oh, it doesn't just move to the next staff, it moves to the next staff or voice. Notice that. So here's the G. When I hit left bracket now, it goes down to the D. Hit left bracket again, it goes down to the bottom staff. So Alt down moves up and down between voices and staves. There's another command that just moves between staves. Or maybe I customized that one. I don't remember. Okay, so now I want to enter, I'm back to voice 1, and I can enter that line here. It's 4, E, but up an octave, 3, A, G, 4, A, B flat, E flat, and then 3, A, F, 4, G, and then 3, F, D. Okay, so let's talk about what's just happened here. MuseScore, I said, will flip stem directions automatically when dealing with multiple voices, but all bets are off once we start dealing with cross-staff notation. As far as mute, and we hit escape. As far as MuseScore is concerned, this bottom staff only has one voice, right? When I select it, you'll see only the real notes that I entered onto that bottom staff are highlighted in blue. Those notes that I moved there with Control-Shift down, they're still black. They are not highlighted. They are not selected. If I hit Control down now, it only moved the notes that are really on the bottom staff down an octave. Those other notes are, they look like they're on the bottom staff, but they live on the top staff. That's how cross-staff notation works. The notes live on one staff, but they're visiting the bottom staff. That's how I'll put it. So because of that, MuseScore is not adjusting these stem directions the way it normally would. So I want to select that passage there, just those couple of beats. So starting on that B flat, and notice that because they're overlapping, it's a little hard to select the B flat. That's okay. Here's going to be my trick. I'm going to select the A and then press the right arrow, and now the B flat is selected. There used to be a command, Control Click, that would cycle through overlapping elements. It's another one of those things that got implemented late in the MuseScore 3 game, didn't make it over to MuseScore 4, and there's someone currently working on re-implementing it. Okay, so I've selected the B flat, and now I will shift click the D, so just those notes are selected, and then I will press, instead of pressing X to flip them, well, yeah, I can just press X to flip them, but I also want to point out that if I come to the Properties panel, I can explicitly set them to down. And I kind of like that because right now, these guys all happen to have stem up, but what if there was a mixture? What if there was a mixture, some stem up and some stem down in here? If I pressed X, they would flip the other way around, which would mean I would still have a mixture, just a different mixture. I want to force those down. So I'm going to press the down. Similarly, these guys I want to make sure are all forced up. They are up now, so maybe I'll just leave that alone. Now, notice also it did not avoid that collision. I just need to fix that collision, really, right? So I should have just done that right away. When I said that I only adjust positions when there's collisions or things, this is one of the cases where you'll get it. It thinks, hey, that's a voice 2 rest. Let me put it towards the bottom of the staff, but it didn't understand the cross-staff notation part of it. So I'm going to use the up arrow key. I'm going to click that rest again and use the up arrow key to move it where I think it would go, which is either floating above the staff like they have it, or maybe crossing it. I'll just put it where they had it. So that's how I did that. Now, I mentioned that as far as that cross-staff notation goes, that there are other ways of doing this, and I want to show you that real quick before I flip ahead to bar 19. If I wanted to move all of those notes at once, here's how I could do it. Click that rest, shift click the last note, and now it's selected everything in both voices here. But if I go on that top staff, but if I then go to View Selection Filter, selection filter lets me say, don't select this thing. So I want to not select voice 1. And so now voice 1 is not selected. Only voice 2 is selected. See that? The rest and those 16th notes are all selected. They're in green. The half note is not selected. Now I can use Control Shift up to move them back to the top staff, or Control Shift down to move them back to the bottom. So that's if you've got a whole passage of voice 2 notes that you want to move down to the bottom, you can use the selection filter to help you select just those notes and then move them all at once, because that Control Shift up down works with multiple notes selected just like it does with 1. When you're done, make sure you reselect voice 1 or you won't be able to actually select anything anymore. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead to bar 19 and talk about that shared note head. Now I don't see a shared note head. 2 voices sharing a note. Where are you talking about? Is that really in this measure or is it a different measure? Help me out, Stephen. I'm not seeing what you're... Oh, here. They're sharing the note but not the note head. Ah, okay. So, okay. So let's go ahead and enter that passage. I don't think that we're going to have to do anything special here. It's interesting for sure. Yeah, so probably a different edition did put that B flat on the bottom staff. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll play with it. But I'll go on the top staff, top voice, 3 for 16th, minus for flat, E, control up. Oops, I entered a 3 for 16th. I meant 4 for 8th. So what I'm going to do is Shift W will lengthen the note first by adding a dot and then going to the next duration, the next note value. So 2 presses of Shift W will turn a 16th into an 8th. And now 3, D, C, F, G, E, F, 5, D, 4, 0, 3, D, B flat. I'll go ahead and put the next note in. 5 equals E. That equals there is necessary because there was, let me undo that. If I just try to enter an E, whoa. Oh, that's because the equal is still selected on the toolbar. If I just select an E, it is an E natural. It's E natural because of the key signature. If I hit up arrow, it goes to F. If I hit down arrow, it goes to E. Down arrow again goes to E flat. I'm never going to get that natural sign to appear on that note just using the arrow keys. The only way to get that to appear is by let me just delete that note, is by actually typing equals or clicking the natural sign before pressing the E. That's the only way to get the courtesy accidental. And that courtesy accidental is absolutely like crucial when reading this note. Otherwise, you're going to have these E flats. And yes, technically the bar line cancels it, but years, centuries of experience have taught people that just because bar lines cancel an accidental, that doesn't mean people are going to read it right the first time. So, so yeah, that's something to be aware of, that courtesy accidentals, they're really not optional. You even though the bar line canceled that, you really need to show that E natural there. All right, so let's go ahead and put in the bottom staff next. So I'll go to note input mode, 4, C up here, up there, B flat A, 3, G, F, B flat C, A, C, B flat A, B flat G, 4, C. All right, now go ahead and enter that middle voice and see what happens. We'll try it the way it is here, and then we'll try it the way Stephen's edition has it. So I go to note input mode, switch to voice 2. Again, I'll use the toolbar, but Control Alt 2 is the shortcut to switch to voice 2. Control Alt number, Control Alt 1 for voice 1, Control Alt 2 for voice 2, etc. So I'm in voice 2, 5 for quarter note, D, C, and I'll enter the B flat, and now 3, F up here, D, 5 for the quarter, G, 4 for the eighth, T to enter the eighth and tie it. So I have that measure entered, and it looks like my addition now. If I take that note and that B flat and do what Stephen's edition here has of moving it to the bottom staff, to be honest, I'm not sure how MuseScore is going to handle that. I don't know if it's going to do the thing. When you enter multiple voices on a single staff, MuseScore is pretty good at figuring out how to handle overlapping notes and does the right thing automatically. It'll give you that look. But when using cross-staff notation, I have zero confidence that that's going to be the case. But we'll find out. Control-Shift down. Okay, it did a pretty decent job. So the note is, it's single note head with two stems, just like I want. However, if you look at Stephen's picture here, you'll notice that it looks maybe a little better for a number of reasons. The main reason is there's just more space between the staves there, and it allows this beam to not look so wonky. This beam looks wonky in part because the B flat is lower than either the F or the D. So this line is basically ascending, and yet the beam is descending. So this is kind of not good beam direction. And again, it's because of the cross-staff notation. MuseScore is really good at dealing with things like that, getting correct beam direction, the right angle of the slope. I mean, it's subjective, but there's well-known criteria to apply, and MuseScore applies them pretty darn well. MuseScore 4 anyhow, 3 not so much. MuseScore 4 does a really good job of getting these beaming details right by default, except when you're dealing with cross-staff notation again. So here, the fact that these notes are on different staves creates a bit of an issue. Now, we're about wrapped up here, and that's fine, but I'm going to talk about how I'm going to deal with this. The way I'm going to deal with this isn't by trying to force more space between these staves. Let me close this for a moment. If I look at my score here, notice that it's it's however many pages it is, it's 3 pages, and the last page is not very full. If I look at the original version here, the original version that I'm working for is 2 pages only. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 systems on the first page, and then 11, bar 11 starts on the next page. So what's going on? Why didn't that work for me? Oh, it's because I have entirely too many measures. That's why. The piece is done after measure 21, 22, 23. So let's find measure 23. Here's measure 23, and delete everything from that to the end. So select there, Control, Shift, End, and then Control, Delete. And let me delete that break, because we know that the last 3 measures are going to fit on a system together, and that's because the last measure is simpler. It's not full of sixteenths. So, measure 13 is the first measure of the second page. No, here, measure 11 is the second measure of the second page. It looks like when I start adjusting things in this way, MuseScore starts automatically adding more space. So I don't want to start fiddling with anything about my spacing until I'm done entering the notes, is the point. When I'm done, then I will look at these sorts of adjustments, because every time I change the layout of things, change how many measures are on a system, how many systems are on a page, etc., these details are going to change. So you don't want to do this sort of fine-tuning until you're done. But I'm going to show you what I would do. So here's what I would do. I would probably just click that beam, click one of these endpoints and hit the up arrow a couple of times, and maybe hit the down arrow here. Is that too short? I would eyeball this. I kind of like it maybe like that. I would play with things like that. Okay, so that's probably what I would do. But the other option would be, I'll hit Control R to reset that beam, is to just force some more space between the staves of that system only, just to get that beam a little nicer. I normally wouldn't resort to that, but I'll try it here. So let me close the selection filter. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to come over to the layout palette, and add to the top staff here a staff spacer down. And now I can select that handle and using control down, start forcing it down so I've got more space. Notice that even as I'm adding a lot of space, it's still got that thing angled wonky, right? So I'm going to need to do both those things. I'll need the spacer and click this guy, click that, and then hit up arrow a couple of times. So it's maybe something a little more like that. So, I would play with the beam angle and that spacer, but again, not until you're done entering notes, because otherwise, as you start adding more measures, adding more notes, the layout is going to change anyhow, and your manual adjustments might turn out to be counterproductive. That's the point I make often. These sorts of decisions make at the very end. It was safe to do it for that rest, because I know that wasn't about the spacing, that was just about the cross staff notation and MuseScore not understanding that rest needs to go above the staff. That kind of adjustment is safe to do at any time. But these other things of tweaking beam angles and adding spacers between staves, don't do that until you're all done. All right, so got a bunch of stuff entered into here and hope you found it useful. So let's hear some music to take it home. Yeah, okay. And it's going to do the thing where it doesn't wake up for a minute, but that's okay. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks for the questions and comments. And yeah, hopefully you saw some things you haven't seen before. But this is really useful. And when in the counterpoint course, when we do the section on fugues, you'll probably really appreciate this, because this is going to come up all the time when we're dealing with entering fugues. But it enters any kind of contrapuntal music. You'll want to use this cross staff notation feature and other purposes as well. So tomorrow will be tomorrow Music Masterclass will be going over stuff again from the counterpoint course, and in particular it'll be people's 3-part exercises. We won't, most people I don't think did it on 2 staves like this using multiple voices, but by using 3 staves it's a lot simpler, and that's how I recommended doing it as a composition exercise. And so yeah, we'll be looking at 3-part music, the projects people have done for the course. Looking forward to that, and I will see you all either tomorrow or next time here. Thanks everyone. Goodbye.